You're watching JCT TV, Bible study for the 21st century. So friends, Jim Cantelon here. Always a joy to come your way. I promised last program that I would give you a little update from our recent trip to Africa. Working for Orphans and Widows is our federal charity, and we've been working 25 years now with orphans and widows impacted by HIV and AIDS, COVID-19, cholera, other kinds of opportunistic diseases. And it's a big part of who we are here at JCT. So right after the break, get ready for some interesting picks. I'm here with Teresa Malila at the Home of Mercy, which is an entire compound now that is a real miraculous transformation from what it used to be. And we're in front of a brand new building, Teresa, that has just recently been built.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about this.
This building is the main hall, and during the cold season, we had nowhere to meet. So this is now the hall that we meet in during the cold season, but also it's a dining room. It has a kitchen, and this is the serving area you see here. It opens up. So we've had training here, quite a bit of training for counselors, for the students in the Berean, the Bible study groups, but also people who come in home-based care. We did the training here for home-based care too. So people come in here and they can learn in here, but they can also sleep in here. Because it's a sleeping facility. At night, they can use the facility to sleep. It's got a kitchen, it's got a stores, and this is a serving area. But it's very airy, as you can see. It's got a lot of windows. So even in the hot season, we can still sit in there. But during the rainy season, we don't normally have a place because the rain comes into the other hall. So this is the perfect place for us. And even the children, when they come, the survivors, this is where we sit with them.
You mentioned the survivors. It's called the Home of Mercy for a reason.
Yeah.
We can maybe talk more about that in another segment, but you do have a number of little girls and young women who've been rescued from sexual abuse.
Yeah, about 66 right now.
So they're right adjacent to this building.
Yeah.
And they have access for feeding and all the other things you're talking about.
And we meet every Friday with them in the afternoons. Since they've started school, now we're going to be meeting on Saturday.
Terrific.
Yeah.
Thanks, Teresa.
You're welcome.
So friends, you know me well enough to know that there's more to me than meets the eye in terms of being a pastor and a Bible teacher on television. I also, with my wife, founded 25 years ago an international charity called WOW, Working for Orphans and Widows. And over the last 25 years, we have been traveling back and forth faithfully to sub-Saharan Africa, working in various African countries with people who Jesus would call the least of these. Orphans and widows impacted, severely impacted by HIV and AIDS, then by COVID-19, opportunistic infections. It's just sorrow on sorrow there. And we have quite a work established there. We work through local churches. In fact, we don't work in any region unless local churches are engaged. We have developed volunteer basis out of these churches who are local church connected, who minister as volunteers during the week to these people who are dying, all in Jesus' name, and have been doing so faithfully now, these 25 years. it's been an astonishing adventure just seeing what God is doing. It's interesting when we arrive in these countries, the excitement that is there. For one thing, they never get an international speaker other than us. But secondly, having some white people come in, especially my wife Kathy, who's blonde, just as we're kind of celebrities just because of our ethnicity. But they're so grateful for our exposing them to the gospel and to the Bible. Most of them can't read. Many of them, of course, can. But it's a very, very special thing for us, as exhausting as it is. In 3 weeks, I spoke 15 times in a few big places with roofs and many places out of doors with people sitting on the ground, 1,000, 1,500 people sitting there in the dust. But nevertheless, this is what we do. And I encourage you to support WOW. That's why I run these little ads during the show. You need to know about it. You need to log on to wowmission.com. You need to go to Instagram at Wow Mission. You need to go to Facebook with Wow Mission and get updates on what we're doing. And I encourage you to do that. And when you do, you're going to want to support it. And when you support WOW, you're supporting JCT because JCT is the official voice of WOW. When you support JCT, you're supporting WOW. We're together. Anyway, when we approached one of the villages in Malawi the other day, this is what we saw. So as we were approaching this one village in Malawi, we expected this, but not in these numbers. As we drove into the village, I just took this video out of the window of the vehicle. But these are all local villagers. You see a lot of kids there, and women, men, all excited that we have come to visit them, and they just want us to know how welcome we are. And it's an amazingly humbling experience, friends, to have this kind of, pardon me, welcome. Pardon me. So, and I'm still getting over my African cold. So, let me show you another pic. They all gathered and sat on the ground, pardon me, and I stood out there with my hat on because I have very little coverage, as you know. And they sat there. There's about 1,500. That's my interpreter to my right. And we took 35, 40 minutes with them listening in rapt attention. Let me just show you a pic here of their focus. Here we go. These are one section of that crowd were pastors and chiefs. And, these are mature men who have positions of leadership. They're in the rural areas of Malawi. And they're just as hungry for the gospel as anybody else. But you can see the focus, the concentration. They love it. I mean, I mentioned that I speak 45 minutes. That to them is not really enough. They would be very happy if I spoke for a minimum of an hour, took a 10-minute break, and then did another hour. One old gal said, Pastor Jim, and they call me Bambo, which means daddy or grandpa. Bambo Jim, I walked 15 kilometers to hear you today. So, you must take your time. Well, it's very humbling to know that someone's walked that far to listen to you, but it's just a different culture, just a different world. Let me show you another pic here. Let's see. In another country, in Zambia, we gathered at a place called Rob's Farm, which is a farm named in memory of our son-in-law, who was killed in an accident in Zambia 14 years ago, leaving our daughter Kate, a widow, and 3 little kids. It's a sad story. Some of you know the story. But Rob was not only a theologian and historian, he was also a farmer and a biologist. And he had scouted out some property in Zambia for a farm to grow food to feed the orphans that we're working with there. And so Rob's Farm was created. This is just one part of the farm. It's just, they call it the Prophet's Hill. And while we were there looking at the tremendous growth of the farm, creating all kinds of food for needy orphans and widows, 100 of their pastors came in to hear me on the topic of righteousness and justice. And so I spent a day with them there. And these are salt of the earth people, friends. These are some of the finest people you'll ever want to meet, ministering the gospel in very adverse circumstances, very humble circumstances. Many of them walked, some of them rode bicycles. We also provided a bus for those who were really far away. But boy, they just spent the whole hour with me, so keen on hearing the subject of righteousness and justice. Here's a pic that to me captures much of the reality of Africa. There's a little girl. She's maybe 5 years old, maybe 4, and she's got her little brother on her back. She'll be carrying that little brother for the next several years. That's what little girls do. They are workhorses. Very few of them will ever go to school. And most of them, and this is a sad thing to say, but it's simply the truth, most little girls, over the course of my history there with 25 years, I very rarely encountered a young girl in her early teens who hadn't been sexually abused. Life is really tough for these sweet little gals, and they are the least of these. And so, when I talk about the ministry that we're doing there, this is the real world that we're dealing with. I'm not interested in laying any guilt on you, but the fact of the matter is that we are so privileged and so blessed, and overwhelmingly so, compared to some of the people I've just shown you here, that we just have so much to thank the Lord for. And I think it's a very important thing as a part of our gratitude that we give out of the wealth, and it is wealth relative to most of the world, the wealth that the Lord has provided us here in the West. I know life is tough here. I know things cost a lot here. I know that sometimes it's very difficult for us to make ends meet. I understand that. I grew up in a context as a pastor's son, pastor of very small churches in Western Canada that were very, very poor. My father underpaid and sometimes not paid at all. I know what it's like to live without food security. I know what it's like to pray for food. I know what it's like to see the Lord provide. This is not something that goes beyond my own personal experience, but it's such a pleasure and a privilege, and I think a responsibility for us to give back and to especially care for the poor. Jesus said he came to preach good news to the poor. Well, you preach good news, you live good news, and the poor are uplifted. So I would encourage you, when you see those little promos on this show for WOW, to write down the coordinates, wowmission.com, @wowmission, Facebook, whatever, and come on board and support this ministry. I'll be back. Often friends like you are curious about what WOW does with your donations. And as I've often said on the television program, we are concerned about home-based care, especially for those who are dying, orphans and widows, of which there are tens of thousands over the past 23 years. But one of our responsibilities with home-based care is making sure that there's some nourishment available in these homes where care is being provided. And as some of you may recall, in March of this year, or 2023, there was a major cyclone called Freddy that struck Mozambique and Malawi. And Malawi was badly hit. Infrastructure was wiped out, roads, culverts, outside latrines, but the maize crop was severely damaged to the point where the cost of maize, which is a basic food component for Malawian everyday people, has more than doubled. And so our partner on the ground, Somebody Cares, contacted me about an urgent need for maize to help our orphans and widows through this difficult time. And so with your help, we managed to raise enough for a huge amount of maize here. I think this is about $15,000 worth. We need to double this, at least. And as the Lord speaks to your heart, if you can help us with this, wow, what a difference it will make in, as Jesus called them, the lives of the least of these. So thanks for your consideration. So thank you, friends, for indulging me and taking a look at some of those pictures and videos. We have so much to be grateful for. You know, one of my memories of just a few weeks ago was we provided 30 of our volunteers just in one little village with brand new bicycles. Some of them, you know, spend 4 to 8 hours a day walking back and forth to patients who are dying. A bicycle cuts their travel time by 2/3. And I made an appeal to you. Some of you got the letter from me. Wrap up a bike for Christmas time. Well, we were able to buy several bikes. In this one village, we were able to give 30 away brand new. You should have seen these volunteers. They were like kids on Christmas morning. What a peal of Thanksgiving from these precious people. Okay, let's get back to the scripture. I mentioned last program the disputes and controversies that the Pharisees, and the Sadducees had with Jesus, because he just was not politically correct when it came to adherence and obedience to what we now call the oral law. They called it the tradition of the elders. Last time I talked about this fence that the rabbis built around the 613 laws of Moses. I won't go back there. I spent a lot of time on that last week. If you didn't see it, just find it on the internet. Go to Jim Cantelon Today. You can find it, or Jim Cantelon Today, YouTube. You can find it. Put in the date, you'll get it. Anyway, lots of disputes and controversies with Jesus on the part of the religious establishment. And in the 12th chapter of Matthew, Matthew gives us some examples of the pushback that Jesus suffered and the religious controversies that he engendered. He truly was despised and rejected of men, as Isaiah prophesied in chapter 53 of Isaiah. So let's start here with chapter 12. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry and began to pick some heads of grain and eat them. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath." He answered, "Haven't you read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and he and his companions ate the consecrated bread, which was not lawful for them to do, but only for the priests. Haven't you read in the law that the priests on Sabbath duty in the temple desecrate the Sabbath and yet are innocent? I tell you that something greater than the temple is here. If you had known what these words mean, 'I desire mercy, not sacrifice,' you would not have condemned the innocent. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." Going on from that place, he went into their synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was looking there. Was there. Looking for a reason to bring charges against Jesus, they asked him, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" He said to them, "If any of you has a sheep and it falls into a pit in the Sabbath, will you not take hold of it and lift it out? How much more valuable is a person than a sheep? Therefore, it's lawful to do good on the Sabbath." Then he said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." So he stretched it out, and it was completely restored, just as sound as the other. But the Pharisees went out and plotted how they might kill Jesus. Whoa. The concept of a Sabbath, as you know, Kathy and I and our 3 children lived in Israel for 7 years. Jerusalem was our hometown. We were there at the invitation of the Israeli government to plant a church in Jerusalem, which we did. You can Google King of Kings, Jerusalem, and see all about it. Sabbath is called Shabbat there. And it is a very, very important day every week. My office in downtown Jerusalem was just around the corner from the Prime Minister's office, so there was always a lot of action there. But it was interesting. At about 2 p.m, I'd look out my window, and I would notice, first of all, I would hear it, but then I would see much less traffic, and the traffic begins to thin down. By about 3:30, there's just no traffic, no buses, no cars. What you see are people in their Shabbat best walking to their parents' home with a loaf of challah bread, a bottle of wine, and some flowers. And they're going to celebrate what we call Kabbalat Shabbat, which means welcoming the Sabbath. And I knew that by 5:15 or thereabouts, half an hour or so before the sun went down, the women in the various Jewish homes would be lighting and blessing the home with their special candle lighting ceremony. And then I would hear the horn. It's like an air raid siren blowing over Jerusalem, telling all of us that the sun had just set, which meant that Shabbat had just begun. In Israel, the day begins at sundown, not at sunrise. So Shabbat goes from sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday. And that's how all the days are, sundown to sundown. When that happened, the families would gather around the family table, and then the oldest man there, the father or the grandfather, would stand at the head of the table, and he would take some bread, he would break it, and he would bless the Lord for the bread. Blessed art thou, Lord our God, King of the universe, that brings forth bread from the ground. And he would distribute it. Then he'd take the bottle of wine, pour some out, and thank the Lord and bless the Lord for the wine that he provides, from the vine. And everyone would have a little bit. And this is the beginning of Shabbat. This, by the way, is a weekly event. And when Jesus in the upper room said, "This is my body which is broken for you, this is my blood which is poured out for you, the blood of the new covenant. Whenever you do this, do it in remembrance of me," he was referring, in my view, to Kabbalat Shabbat. He wanted to be remembered. And this Last Supper, with the bread and the wine, became a trigger mechanism, if you will, for memory. But that's another subject. But this concept of Shabbat, in Hebrew it means to cease, desist, terminate, be at an end. It had a long history, which predated the Ten Commandments in Exodus 20. When God fed the wandering Israelites in the wilderness for 40 years by daily raining bread down from heaven, he did so 6 days a week. And on the sixth day, he would rain down enough for them to have it on the seventh day, which they could keep without it being spoiled, because he would not rain down bread on the seventh day. It was Shabbat. So because on the seventh, he rested from his miraculous provision. He modeled this for Israel. This later appeared in the Ten Commandments, of course. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, Exodus 20, verse 8. And the point was to give beleaguered mankind, which is all of us, at least one day a week to eat, to sleep, and to play. Recreation, rest, reflection, good eating. Just the essential kind of human good things that we all need so much. God created us humans in his likeness, not as animals of labor. He gave us a day for recreative charging of the batteries, because it's in the best interest of all of us. Indeed, the Shabbat gave opportunity for praise and worship to the Father. That's why it became known as the Lord's Day, a day when God was uplifted and man's burdens were lightened. But unfortunately, history shows us that the rabbis made the Sabbath into an exacting institution. Whereas the scriptures describe a general proscription of labor on the Sabbath, the rabbis spent centuries debating what does and does not constitute a desecration. And in the Talmud, which is a very holy book, they list 39 categories of forbidden labor. Are you ready for this? I got a minute and a half. Sowing, plowing, reaping, binding sheaves, threshing, winnowing, selecting, guiding, sifting, kneading, baking, shearing wool, bleaching, carding, dyeing, spinning, warping, making two thrums, weaving two threads, separating two threads in the warp, knotting, unknotting, sewing two stitches, tearing for the purpose of sewing two stitches, hunting the stag, slaughtering it, flaying, salting the flesh, preparing the hide, scraping the hair, cutting it into pieces, writing two letters of the alphabet, erasing for the purpose of writing two letters, building, demolishing, kindling a fire, extinguishing it, striking with a hammer, transferring an object from one domain to the other. Whew. And I could take time. I have it in my notes, but I'm not going to do it. I could read to you a most interesting passage from the Talmud that describes what constitutes a burden, on the Sabbath day, and what you can carry and what you can transfer to another person. A Sabbath day's journey. What's up with that? How far can you walk on the Sabbath day? What you can, what you can't do. These were the burdens of Shabbat. So friends, the Sabbath, Shabbat, is absolutely key to what it means to be Jewish. And wherever you go in the world, in the Jewish communities, Shabbat is celebrated, even among those who are liberal and those who are conservative and everything in between. It's a wonderful day. It's a day of rest. It is the Lord's day. And believe me, living in Jerusalem as my wife and I did for 7 years, when Shabbat came around, with the intensity of life in Israel, Shabbat was like, the whole city just kind of went, rest from God. How special is that? It's something that maybe we need to rediscover. So, depending on where you're watching the program, some of you are watching it on Friday afternoon, Friday night, around the world, we're everywhere, through the miracle of the internet and television. Shabbat Shalom.